Well, thank you so much for joining. My name is Kennedy Owen, as you may know, and I'd love to get to know a little about you, your upbringing, and currently where your career has brought you.
Okay, well, my name is Scott Dressler. I'm a professor of economics at Villanova University. I got my PhD way back in 2004 at the University of Texas at Austin. My research specialization is in monetary economics, basically where I deal with financial intermediation, monetary policy issues, and how it impacts the macroeconomy.
Very cool. And as your title states, so you're currently a professor at Villanova, is that correct?
Correct.
And how has that experience been for you? How long have you been with Villanova? And is there possibly any other colleges you worked for in the past?
I worked for at a couple of Fed banks while I was getting my PhD, but ever since I got my PhD in 2004, I came to Villanova as a faculty member, and I've been here ever since. You know, being an academic and being a professor is a great profession, and Villanova is a great place to do it.
Amazing. What specifically was there, maybe a moment in time, or what got you into economics, or specifically the kind of field that you are in economics?
Okay, good question. When I was an undergrad, back in Buffalo in the 90s, um, my interests were all over the place. It went everywhere from physics to chemical engineering to statistics to photography for a little bit. So, I was pretty much undecided and all over the map in my undergrad. Um, Once I took my first introductory macroeconomics course. It was right in the first day of class where I was hooked because my professor at the time, an instructor by the name of Jim Holmes at the University of Buffalo, he basically ended our first lecture with a discussion about the German hyperinflation. And I don't know if you're familiar with this piece of history, but it was basically um, a situation where after World War One, Germany was, straddled with lots and lots of debt, basically with, debt from actually fighting World War One, as well as having to pay war reparations from losing World War One. And they decided to print a lot of money to try and pay off these debts. And basically all the money basically just came back to them. And you were looking at thousands upon thousands of percent of inflation. And there's, historical pictures where you're looking at, you know, a wheelbarrow full of money, which is how much it would take to buy a loaf of bread, and people heating their homes by burning money. And it was, um, you know, basically just this horrible, catastrophic, episode of world history. It has some implications for, what happened in Germany and World War II, essentially. But, this was, the roots of a lot of things was basically just down to economic decision making. And then you just kind of understand that the world we live in, this macroeconomic mechanism, has some serious implications. And right from that point, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And there's a lot of, this is really important, and it has historical significance, and there's a lot going on, and it's something worth understanding. And so from that point on, from that day on, I became an econ, a macro major, right? So from that point, it was always macro for me. And that was basically that one point in time that this is what I want to do.
Very cool. And I really like how you shared that you were kind of all over the place as many other people that were in your same position. You don't really know what will sway your interests and what you ultimately pursue. And that's really awesome that that really connected with you.
Yeah.
A question I have for you, as someone in the field and teaching many students within the field, why do you think economics is a strong career or major?
Okay. Another good question. So if you were to, you know, basically ask me what is economics, right? And then there's a bunch of different types of answers where it's supply and demand, or it's markets, or it's money, and they're all specific, but correct. But if you look at the one broad arching, you know, statement for what is economics is the social science based on decision making. We try and understand how to make decisions. Why? Because this is where the whole textbook stuff, where everyone is faced with scarcity, there's more wants than there are resources. We have to choose amongst them. So when we start talking about making decisions, it's always weighing costs and benefits. And this is where, the real economic intuition comes from. And if you say, all right, I'm faced with a decision, if you can break it down into the costs and the benefits, and then weigh out which one is best, whether it's on the margin or not, and get into all those type of details. I mean, you basically are making an optimal decision, and this making an optimal decision is applying economics. And again, if you are someone like me who is, trying to understand how monetary policy implementation gives individuals a different, set of options to do what, policymakers want them to do, or if you are a lawyer who's trying to look at contract negotiations or trying to sway the options given to a jury, or if you're a politician trying to deal with other types of maybe fiscal or social policies. These are all decisions, and these are all, basically can be addressed using the tools and intuition of economics. So, I'm basically like in my classroom, I am totally okay or comfortable with the idea that very few of the people in my class are going to become economists. It's that, as long as you understand the mechanism, which is the world you're living in, one thing, and two, how to identify, break down, and optimally address decisions, then I couldn't be happier. Then I've kind of done my job in the sense that, you know, my job is to just help you appreciate the fact that we live in a mechanism that is completely fired off by people making different decisions. And once you start to see that, and once you kind of understand, you know, what is going on and what decisions people are making, then you start to understand the world around you. Because, you know, I don't really need to be a central banker, or I don't need to be someone on Wall Street. I just need to understand what decisions they have in front of them. And then I can kind of understand, or at least get an idea of what kind of decisions they would be making. And that's understanding the macroeconomy.
Amazing. And I really like how you put that into perspective and worded that. I feel like that's all accurate. And yeah, I really like how the field is so like broad and there's so many ways that you can take having that degree or major. As a professor at Villanova, is there anything particular to Villanova's economics department that you really think is unique, or just Villanova as a whole that you think is just um, unique compared to other colleges?
Um, I guess that would depend on what group of colleges you're doing the comparison to. You know, most of my undergraduate career has been in rather large universities, University of Texas, University of Buffalo, things like that. So, you know, that lecture that I was mentioning earlier, that introductory macro class, that was about, a 200 student lecture hall. You know, there's a time and a place for that kind of stuff, and I'm not totally against it, but I very much enjoy the smaller class sizes and the more personable interactions that are going on at Villanova. For here, we are looking at intro classes, for example, that I teach now are around 30 students. Definitely the kind of group where we can have, more thorough discussions, and we can talk about current events, and we can actually splice out, back and forth, and what would be the type of decisions that people are making in real time, as opposed to just, a professor being up in front of 200 people with some slides saying, here's that. And then, that's, I'm not totally against that, but this is more my speed, where we can have a little bit more of a discussion. As far as like that, like, those small classrooms is kind of where the whole major, and outside of the major as well, but the whole Villanova education kind of is. It's definitely a lot more where students come to my office and discuss, whereas when I was an undergrad, I don't think I ever spoke to my professors. Um, but that's just back then versus now. But the overall major in economics at Villanova is, small class size being said, it's pretty much covers all the bases that you would get at most universities. I mean, other than the macro stuff, which I'm the one that's mostly keen about, there's obviously a lot of micro and developmental economics and a lot of other different fields that you would need to get a well-rounded idea of what economics is as a major. Again, they all basically are talking about looking at decisions, but decisions of different groups, right? And then on top of that, you have the unavoidable technical skills like math and statistics and things like that. Because if you're going to understand decisions, or at least try and make sense of what decisions were being made, you kind of need to understand the data and kind of see, well, what's actually going on in the data, because your job as an economist is to try and understand what decisions were being made and what made this data actually happen. So being able to look at the data is kind of crucial. And that's kind of what this major as a group, is kind of delivering. And then at the end of the day, you kind of get into more applied classes, like working with, Federal Reserve challenge classes, or seminar classes where you actually work on undergraduate theses. And this is where at the very end, you take all the decisions and all the analysis skills you have, and go a little bit deeper on something that someone finds very interesting, or you personally as a student are the most interested in.
Very cool. Yeah, and I really like also you mentioned like smaller class sizes. I think that just kind of allows someone to have a deeper connection to the conversation rather than just kind of feeling what's going on. I mean, obviously, you guys might have cases of that, but I think that's a really good observation. The final question I have for you is how can someone within the field or student studying economics stand out or maybe just kind of progress better?
Okay, well, so I guess the way to kind of think about this is it all kind of ties in with, I guess, what we've been speaking about previously, in the sense that, what is economics? Economics is the study of decision making. And if you put it that in such a basic way, then you can understand just how broad the study of economics can be. And if you are wanting to stand out, or you want to really kind of just, succeed in economics, the best thing to do is to, once you kind of get this general idea of all the different types of decisions, or all the different types of specific ways that economics can be applied to different parts of our world, to really just say, just identify which one you find most interesting and focus on it. And, like, so for me, I am very, narrowly focused, at least in terms of my research, on the kind of things that impact people's holding of money, monetary policy implementation, central commercial banking, and things like that. That's a very, very small, section of economics, right? Next door to me is someone who basically works on World Bank decisions and World Bank funding decisions. Again, that's decisions of the World Bank, but now it's something very different, how they talk about giving loans to developing nations and things like that. So as a student, and if a student is inside my class, my job is to say, all right, here's a little bit broader of an idea of the type of decisions that a macroeconomist would look at, and to say, all right, maybe I don't really care so much about, the short run fluctuations of the economy, like say the recessions or the business cycle aspects, but I'm much more interested in, economic growth. And you say, okay, I now want to kind of say I want to focus more of my efforts on understanding economic growth. And then we can start talking about how that applies to developing nations or developed nations, what type of like government policies would be most growth oriented, like infrastructure or education policy. And then maybe you just want to do nothing but education policy, and that now becomes your bag, right? So, and it's whatever interests you have, that's there's no right answer to that. It's just whatever you're most interested in. And to really excel would to be identifying that as soon as possible and just say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to focus on. And then when you start getting into more higher level courses, you now say that, here's an econometrics class. I want to apply all of my econometric skills on looking at education policy, which there are tons of opportunities for doing that. Once you get into upper elective courses and you start writing papers, I want to write everything on education policy. And so at the end of the college career, you now actually have like a little bit of an expertise going where you can go to job interviews or go to internships and you can really know what you're talking about, right? And all that really takes is just a little bit of a little bit of introduction at the beginning, and really just making a decision of what interests you the most, and then pursuing it.
Yeah, and I think that's really strong example, and I feel like it's really nice to like find what your craft is within the broad discussion of economics as a whole. Well, thank you so much for joining, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.